welcome everybody to a Real Talk Guest Talk. Our topic today is inclusive leadership, and I have invited Anna Garbea, William Galton, and Brad Solomon to discuss the subject together with me.
So Frank, thanks for inviting me. I run the CTG Group, a leadership and coaching consultancy. And as an executive coach, I love the question, what do you stand for, Frank? For me, it's about inspiring development so that people grow. And it's been that for William, like you, more than a couple of decades, and still enjoying inspiring development so that people grow. Looking forward to today.
Sure. Morning, everybody. My name's William Galton. It's lovely to be with you on this Real Talk. I am a learning and development consultant and executive coach. I've done that now for well over a couple of decades, and I'm still here to tell the tale. As far as what I stand for and what I'm about, I was thinking about this morning. I think for me, something which I feel strongly about is I want people to experience more meaning and more satisfaction and more happiness and joy in their kind of day-to-day work endeavors. So that it doesn't feel like a chore. That's something which I feel very strongly about. And I guess that for me, one of the things in terms of one of the reasons why I do what I do is because I like to, and I believe I do, and want to make a difference. So,
hello, everyone. I'm Anna Garbea. I'm an HR director in an IT company and also soft skills trainer and career and personal development coach. What motivates me is that I see myself as a catalyzer to help businesses and people grow. And I think it's amazing to be able to be this kind of fuel that makes people and organizations use their resources and achieve their goals. So either it's personal, either it's business, we all meet together somewhere in the middle. And this is what makes me wake up happy in the morning.
Hi, my name is Frank Basinski. I'm the founder of Blue Horizon Training, a leadership coaching and training company. My highest motivation with the company is to help and encourage leaders to become their best possible selves. And in engagements, our highest goal is to create a true impact, to inspire change and to inspire people and acquire new skills. Let's just quickly take an introduction into the subject. Inclusive leadership is made of a number of traits. So that is commitment to inclusivity. It's the courage to drive in inclusivity, but also the courage to look inside yourself with humility and bravery where it's needed. It's about cognizance for your own biases. And that speaks to the self-regulation of the bias and deploying a fair play at all times. The fourth trait is curiosity, which is all about openness, taking perspectives and coping with ambiguities. And the fifth one is cultural intelligence. So acquiring the knowledge about the differences in cultures, adapting to the requirements of different cultures, ways of thinking, ways of acting, ways of doing business, understanding how customers are different, and so on. And the sixth one is about collaboration. So collaboration as a trait is something that an inclusive leader always needs to drive. It's about empowerment and teaming and giving a voice to the people and the talents on your team. Just as a quick wrap up. So there's a lot of research that shows that inclusive leadership ultimately drives employee engagement. Why is that so? It is so because when everybody feels fairly treated, well understood, supported, empowered, and so on, there's a motivation that comes from inside every associate of wanting to be part of something, of wanting to create, of wanting to innovate, of wanting to work together and collaborate to find better solutions, to create better outcomes. So when you work in an environment where the culture is contingent on everybody giving their best and being creative and collaborating and teaming and finding new solutions, it becomes even more vital, so to speak. I'm sure what I just said is already a subject for discussion, and I'm wondering if my guests are going to pick up on this. Does anybody want to add anything, just as a wrap up or introduction into the topic?
I would say that this topic seems to be also on a higher agenda. Like if I'm looking at the subject from HR and recruitment point of view, you know that the European Union has laid down a diversity quota, for example, and this is coming more and more into real life because since it's a process that doesn't happen naturally, it begins by being standardized. So yeah, we see a lot of effort in this direction because we have not been fully aware of the importance of this inclusivity.
I think building on Anna's point, I also think, I mean, it's interesting if you consider the old adage of, as they are goals, so they will behave. So I think that you've got that aspect, which is to quote you in terms of there's a particular quota. I think that one of the ways that this can be encouraged in a peculiar way is by having goals and objectives related to whatever you're trying to achieve as far as being more diverse is concerned. Is that a fair observation to make, Anna, do you think, or not?
Yeah, I think I totally connect to what you say. And I would also say that it's a bit controversial because in the HR community, sometimes people have strong opinions saying that, look, if we have a quota, this means we could end up having some discrimination because instead of hiring the best persons, we just need to fill the quota.
Agreed.
But yeah. I think if we look at the main purpose and the fact that the intention is good and that we have to start from somewhere, and this start could mean also raising awareness, I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, agreed. Interesting.
And I think, and to your point, and I think that builds on, Frank, what you're saying is that it's about the intention of creating an inclusive culture. We're specifically talking about inclusive leadership, which is by the traits you've given us, Frank, there, their behaviors. We can all adopt them if we choose. But it's the wider picture of trying to create a culture in an organization, which I think means we do have to have guidelines and boundaries in how we're supposed to think, because we're trying to change multi-generational thinking into something that's very kind of laser focused for today. So I think it's a fascinatingly important topic to be bringing up.
Talking about those traits, I actually have a question for you guys. So let's just remember them real quickly. We're talking about commitment to inclusivity, courage, cognizance of bias, curiosity, cultural intelligence, and collaboration. I wanted to ask you, maybe just ping it back to Brad first, is if you would select two of those traits, which of those actually resonate with you the most personally, and why? Maybe there's a story behind that.
I think it's cognizance and collaboration. I feel fairly strongly. Collaboration, because in the business and work that I do, I look for where to collaborate with coaches, with leadership facilitators, and with clients. So my intention as a starting point is collaboration. Cognizance is of a more recent acquisition, I think. And it's because I am conscious that I need to bring my attitudes, my thinking from the 20th century into the 21st century, and actually start being cognizant of what my bias is, how it shows up, what that looks like for team members or people I'm working with and for. So maybe 10 years ago, I'd have said courage and collaboration, but today I say cognizance and collaboration.
Interesting. Let me ask the same question to Anna. If you would pick two that are, for some reason, of highest relevance to you, which would those be and why?
I would say that courage is the first one, and then commitment to actually implement a difference. And now I will explain why I say courage, because I think we are creatures of habit, individually, but also as a group. And even if you feel that you are on your own, like maybe you are the only one that really feels you should invest more into this in your organization, this means you have to stand out and showing the benefits of this and what's in it for everybody individually, but also as a group. And it takes courage, because also in every system, the moment someone or something changes, it's in the system that there will be a movement in order to reduce the noise. We want things to stick to it as they used to be. And then you need this commitment. That's why I see them connected. You need to be committed into continuing this process, because it's one thing just to show an idea and to do a nice presentation and to bring out some statistics, and then it's something else to become a promoting of this thing inside, and also of doing follow-up, and also making a plan for creating the change in this area.
I like that. It's also a good argumentation. I see some other heads nodding. It's tough to pick one, right? But I think everybody has something that speaks to them personally the most, perhaps because of past experiences. William, how about you share yours?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because when both Anna and Brad communicated, I went, oh, yeah, that's really good. What they said. Yeah, I really like that. And I kind of went, but I'm going to stick with what I originally thought as you were communicating. For me, I think the biggest driver is, and I kind of actually struggle to say it, but cognizance, which for me is within the context of awareness. And specifically, I think that why I feel so strongly about that is that it's to do with bias and my unconscious bias, which I think is a gateway, if you can be more aware, for the other ones. And probably the second one on there will be curiosity, and very much to both Anna and Brad's point, they are connected. But the cognizance one, I think, is interesting within the context of awareness of bias. I mean, look, I did this exercise a little while ago where I wrote down the names of kind of 10 go-to people whom I would in a time of need approach. And if I look at the list, they share a lot of similarities. So for me, that is a bias. They tend to be in their 50s, maybe around that time. Yeah, they're in their 50s. They tend to be talking about sexual orientation. They tend to be heterosexual. They tend to be married. Many of them have kids. So you can see, I look at this list and kind of go, wow, I've really, how open, because I like to believe I'm open, but when I really look at it, I kind of go, how open am I within the context of curiosity? So, yes. But I really love what Anna and Brad said, and I kind of went, oh yeah, actually know what they said. I really like it.
Yeah, I had the same moment. I'm wondering if viewers will have a similar experience. Let me just quickly share mine. I actually would have selected curiosity first. From my experience, if you, and I talk about this a lot anyway, because I really believe in the power of it. If you deploy genuine curiosity for the people around you, you can't help but, also, maybe become aware of biases that you might have. You will begin to deploy the cultural intelligence. You will seek out collaboration. If you're curious, you want to collaborate almost always. I think it's kind of follows. And in the end, you can't help but actually be committed to inclusivity, because you are actually discovering its benefits. But in any case, I'm not saying this is the right order. If there's any order to it at all, then that must follow. But that's how it would work for me. Maybe because bias is, I would like to believe I'm almost free of it. I never distinguished in any way, as far as I remember, between hiring a female manager or a male manager or a mid-aged one or a younger one. I had all of those. I never really looked at that. So maybe for me, this is not the tougher part. Perhaps it's more in the courage also, where when you are aware as let's say you're a mid-level manager and you really want to drive inclusive leadership, but the environment that you're in doesn't support that. So somehow you need to fight for your ideals in this, but the system is against you. And I believe that requires a good piece of courage.
Mm.
Frank, there's a challenge there for a lot of managers, particularly if you think of, say, within a sales environment. I was sort of discussing this topic with a sales organization, and they were saying that when you look at the way people carry their own numbers, how they're targeted on their comp and ben plan, actually it doesn't always drive inclusivity. Actually, by the very nature of it, it creates a competition that isn't about equity.
Right.
So it's a really interesting dilemma for some organizations. And I'm sure from an HR point of view, when you live and work in the HR world, like all of us on this call do, it seems easier to walk in the forest of inclusive leadership and see and adopt the behaviors. But I've experienced leaders really struggle with just having to be quite so different in a non-binary way in how they're thinking. But from that HR functional point of view, is there an ease or a toughness for certain groups? I wonder.
Well, it's complicated and it depends a lot on the company and on its agenda, because business is business. So mainly, you are there to drive business results through people, and you need the right people for this. And it's also about alignment. I mean, the executive management that should be aligned in terms of objective with its managers. But I think that in the end, there is someone that has to be the one supporting these ideas, a neutral function that doesn't have any explicit benefits from this, like an HR function or maybe like an L&D consultant that just looks into the problem in a very objective way and can show you why you should do this and approach it in a strategic way and what it can bring for you. When you are inside a company, you have to always, from my point of view at least, you have to always mitigate between your ideals and reality. And sometimes reality is that you have already conceived a recipe, like you know that this kind of people will get you these results. And as William said, you will mainly look into this. But also from time to time, you have to take risks. And this means bringing on the table maybe some new profiles of people, and also looking for potential. And maybe on the paper, they may not seem to be the right persons, but when you look into the motivation and what people have to offer, then you should give them a chance. Of course, based on some good arguments, and but not always follow the recipe. And I think this is where the assertiveness and the negotiation part comes into discussion.
Yeah.
I hope this answered a bit your question.
So I found what you said interesting when you referenced strategy as well, which is I think that potentially gives a platform to be more courageous and communicate from a position of, well, this is what we say we're about, and this is what we say we stand for. And I think it's a useful reference and platform to communicate from, because, I mean, I do find that, people tend to gravitate towards people who are like them. So how do you kind of short circuit that? And I think that strategy is a good point. People say that they're about this thing. So it almost kind of gives you some sort of like leverage point to communicate more powerfully, I think, potentially.
Yeah, I think strategy is a must, because if you only have a vision and no steps how you can acquire it, then it's a waste of time. Like, it's a nice idea, but it's only remains this, an idea. And you need the strategy in order to actually put it at work, that vision, and also show later some results. So it means making some follow-up. It means some assessment. It means being fair by evaluating, okay, did it bring what you said it would? Okay, it only brought 70%, but still it's a plus. Did it help achieve better results? And so strategy is not something that it will die like this. It's an organism, and I think it's always adapted based on what happens in real life on the market, because the elements of the strategy are dynamic. And you start from one point and you have the bigger lines. And then I think on the road, you keep on adding or maybe subtracting some stuff.
There's
nice.
Yeah, you have a good perspective on that. But you know, while we're talking about this, maybe it would be interesting to explore a little bit the dark side. So I'm wondering if there's any of you who would say, have you ever worked in a non-inclusive environment before? Who did? Just raise your hand if you ever worked in an environment that was not inclusive. Did any of you? All right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether I'd say it was non-inclusive deliberately. I think to Brad's point around intent, I think they kind of accidentally kind of fell into that. And so people were recruited to a degree on merit, but also just because you kind of go, they're our kind of person.
So I think, there's a challenge, isn't there? Because a lot of the time when we recruit against competency and we recruit against cultural fit.
Yeah.
And cultural fit isn't just for the wider organization, but it's for sometimes very specifically the team within that organization. So like normally begets like, Psychology Room 101. And I wonder whether everybody listening to this, watching this, Frank, would have experienced a non-inclusive leadership lifestyle at work. Because if you look at most leadership teams across global companies, what is the real diversity of the top floor executive suites of offices? What is the gender bias? What are they like on LGBTQ, on color, all ethnic minorities? I mean, actually, if you look at most boards of directors, where is the inclusivity and diversity? So I'm not surprised if everyone on this call has worked within, at times, a non-inclusive environment, and they can feel it, either for themselves or for their colleagues who are discriminated against or not listened to.
Well, how did it feel for you personally? You raised your hand a little with this, like you've been in a non-inclusive environment before. How was that for you?
So mine was from an external perspective, so I wasn't with internal. There's always that sort of framing of it. But what I observed and what I felt in empathy was a lack of being listened to and a lack of being heard. So I felt that you had these leaders who would come in and, you know, they'd clap their hands and here's the problem. This is what I think we should do. Come on, guys, help me out here. And it was all very motivational, but it was all leader-centric. There was no views asked for. When people did speak, they were like, yeah, okay, thanks. So I feel there's a real, in inclusive leadership, you listen, you hear, and you understand everybody. And what it felt like in a non-inclusive environment was you were listened to, but you weren't heard, and you were definitely not understood. That's what I noticed most.
You know, it's a little bit like, I guess, you know, the right to speak up and knowing the answers is a strictly hierarchical property.
Right.
Yeah. Anna, how about you? Non-inclusive environment, and how did that feel for you or others around you?
I will stick to my own example because it's better to, you know better what's inside your inner world. So for me, it was like this. I felt more and more I became an undervalued resource because I couldn't give it all. Like I wanted to do more things, but I couldn't make my voice heard. And also it was the lesson of learning to live with this, because up to a point when you see that that system is more powerful than your own commitment into creating change, then you have to adapt, and also you have to survive. And sometimes the energy that you have to put in such a system consumes you so much then that it gets to affect your performance. So I felt that I had to make a compromise, and I just had to understand that this is not a battle that I can win, because the chances of influencing the others were so small. And I did my best to do the best of my job, but under those circumstances. But overall, I mean, when I changed that organization, I did it because I felt that my place was not there, and that I'm not using my resources. And that was a pity, and it made me feel sad and in the end unsatisfied.
Right.
So this is how it was for me.
It actually reminds me, I'm gonna, for the next question that I have, but I'm gonna park that because I want to ask William first if he can contribute something about that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, because I think that some of it depends upon what you want. So I think about Anna and Brad's example in terms of the experience of not being heard and wanting to implement or put certain ideas forward. I have a slightly different view, which is, I guess because I was hired and I understood it, and within the context of groupthink, I actually felt okay about it, because I probably kind of added more agreement to the sort of construct of what the organization was about, because I fitted and I was okay and I agreed with the thing. So I probably kind of didn't make it worse, but I just sort of slotted in with the groupthink process, because I do think that whole thing around bias is that if you feel, I mean, for me, I believe what the organization was trying to do. Admittedly, I can see it in terms of kind of going, okay, certain people would fit in well, certain people wouldn't. But because I fitted in well, I was kind of part of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So because we mentioned this, I think Anna actually hinted to it, is this whole discussion, maybe it doesn't matter if there would be no negative effects on the business outcomes, but there are, aren't there? You know, for example, as you know, you were pointing out, Anna, you felt, you know, as an underappreciated, not seen, not heard talent who wanted to do more. And what happened? You left. And that hurts in today's times, right? Because where more and more work has been done with your brain versus with your hands, smart people who actually want to contribute, who want to be part of something, who may have ingenious ideas, who drive innovation, underappreciate them and they go to your competitor. Isn't that exactly the problem? Apart from the ethic questions and morale questions about inclusive leadership, but if you know, I'm sometimes thinking when I observe some leaders speak, how they think about their role and so on, that in the end, what they all care about is really just the business results. So they think they can forego or ignore the principles of inclusive leadership, but they don't see that they actually pay a big price. It comes a little bit later. What do you think, guys?
So what's the question we're already posing
here? Well,
it's
actually, if you maybe from your perspective have observed any negative effects for the business in an environment that wasn't built on inclusivity and inclusive leadership.
Okay.
My sense is retention is the easiest port to look at first. Keeping good people. The world, the universe today demands that we are more inclusive and diverse. Now, I'm not saying that we need to focus lenses from 2021 and judge people for what they said in 1970. That wouldn't be fair. But the world has changed, and I think one thing that the pandemic has done globally is create this opportunity for global empathy, where we can genuinely start thinking and looking at others and being more aware and more respectful, because we're all in this together. We're all fighting this virus together across the globe. So this idea that the world could sort of change and lean into this idea of global empathy, well, then we've got a really good starting point for leaders who are all being told to show up as leaders, to lead from the heart, to create psychological safety. All the language that's grown out of the pandemic gives us an incredible opportunity. But when businesses just ignore it, from the leaders down and back up again, you will have people leave now because they'll find it elsewhere, and it will be with competitors.
Yeah, people have options more than the individual leader or company owner likes.
Right. Exactly.
Any other comment on this?
Yeah, I want to add something to what Brett said. And now we have this question, okay, and we have some people leaving. And what do we do? Do we care to find out why they are leaving? And do we care to do something about it? So if I were to suggest a strategy, because I was the one bringing it up, my opinion is like this. First of all, pay enough time when a person leaves, especially if it's on a leadership, management, middle management position, but mainly you should do it for every person that leaves a company. Don't stick with the official version that he gives, like, I want better perspectives and I would like to leave. Take the time to have an exit interview. That is not done on a template. Be there with all your human and business acumen and really try to find out what motivated that person and what pushed the buttons so that he would leave. And if you do this in a proper way and also take responsibility as a company for the feedback that you'll get, then when the numbers add, you will see some patterns, maybe. And then you can reflect, and then you can come up with a bit of strategy. Yes, but what I want to say is that if we only treat people leaving individually, okay, we have one guy leaving from this department and we have one from the other department, but don't connect the dots, we will not see us in a mirror as the company. So that's why it has to be a structured process, and that's why I'm sure that for the person coming to the management meeting and showing that, look, we received also this strange feedback. How do you feel about this? Someone has to take the bull by the horns, and not necessarily, it's not about accusing, but it's about being transparent and look how people perceive us. It may not even be totally entirely true, but at least when you know what you are dealing with, you know how you can accommodate it and find a solution, maybe.
That's a good point. I actually also believe that. I think a lot of companies are doing exit interviews, and they may do this at different qualities, but I think the real question is, what do you do with the information? Do you actually really act upon what you're learning, or is this just dying in some drawer, you know? I think that would probably make a difference. You would be cutting off a learning process, a vital one, if you just collect the data because it's a good practice. But the top management doesn't really care about it. It's not on somewhere on the priority list number 124. Then that's not going to work.
Yeah, and also just keep in mind that the theory says like this. There are two types of motivators, of factors that make people leave a company. So there are the hygiene factors that are the basic things like money and basic needs and how is the overall environment. But then what the difference comes from the motivators. And usually people take decisions like leaving and changing the employer because of this lack of motivational factors, you know, and one of these motivational factors could be inclusivity.
Yes.
Because it strikes on the hierarchy of needs a more self-fulfilling need, inclusivity, being understood, giving more sense to your life. So maybe that's why in exit interviews, people mainly focus on, okay, what was the reason? Oh, more benefits, more money, and we stick to this. But you should go with the discussion into those motivators.
Yes, you're right. Anything to add from someone?
I think attrition and retention would definitely be the case in terms of talent. I also think it's interesting because we're talking about inclusive leadership. If you look at, I mean, any HR survey that I've read, which asks the question, why do people leave an organization? And this is going back like, you know, a couple of decades, that the reasons seem to be quite consistent and constant, which is the number one reason they leave is because of the relationship or lack of relationship with their manager. Stroke leader. That's the number one reason. And the second reason is not feeling valued, appreciated, or heard. That seems to be the second reason. And then fourth on the list, normally around that mark, is around money. So I just think it's quite interesting because I know we're talking about inclusive leadership and diversity, but I think that the reasons why people go have been around for a very long time. And it's badged up in the context of inclusive leadership. But the reasons still remain the same and have done for a while. I mean, yeah, we've all seen the kind of, you know, people don't leave companies, they leave bosses, sort of phrases and memes and that kind of thing. So that's kind of where I'm at with that, I guess.
And Brad, when you lean forward, you usually want to add something.
No. For me, it's about how do we create this culture of equity and diversity to become an inclusive leader? How do we develop inclusive thoughts? There's something very collaborative and innovative, I think, for organizations and leaders today to encourage every single person to speak up. So I think that when we look at the reasons that get in the way of being inclusive in organizations, it's individuals. It's individuals that get in the way. We need to open our minds. And Frank, you've done real talks with me and with others where you talked about that growth mindset. And I think they're inextricably linked. As I listen to Anna talk, as I listen to William, I think you can't do this without a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
True.
If you are genuinely just feeling stuck, it's about opening the mind and really exploring from everybody's perspective. And I think if that happens, you could create that level of equity.
No. You know what? But on that, I wonder, on a practical note, assuming you are a middle manager somewhere in a larger organization, and that maybe isn't really, built on or predicated on inclusive thinking, inclusive leadership, and so on so much, and how can you practically, because, as I mentioned earlier, it could be that you're in an environment that's pretty much against this, is at least really not enforcing or supporting this. But how, as the average middle manager, how can you possibly force the executive team, who are really at the driving front of a culture, to look at and acknowledge the problem?
Well, I don't know what you guys think, and maybe Anna, you've probably got a better insight having come from an internal perspective so recently, but my experience shows me that the C-level tend to become aware of this when there's a problem lower down. So I think it comes nowadays, awareness comes from people not accepting the norm as acceptable anymore and calling it out. And I think that a lot of organizations now have a culture of transparent communication. And I think that helps people lower down the organization, call out the behavior when it's not inclusive. And I think now we see more of that happening. I think senior leaders now have it on their radar, because it can be costly if you're having tribunals every month with people who say your leaders aren't being like this or like this. And whether you're in the EU or in the UK, or anywhere globally, there will be rules and regulations for how you treat people. So yeah, I think this is here now for good, but senior leaders are only seeing it when it comes in the form of a case against the organization for a lack of inclusivity.
I think that transparency piece that you're talking about is interesting, because I also think that people can set platforms up for people to communicate the kind of ideas that you're talking about. I also think some of it comes down to the relationship. So what I've noticed is that people feel more equipped to communicate to the C-suite level if they feel like they've got some degree of relationship. And also I think that, you don't necessarily want to be the person who's banging the drum, unless you do. But I think I'm a big believer in seeking first to understand before being understood, to quote Covey. So I think that if they can engage with leaders to kind of find out where they're at with it, what the intent and the plan is, and engage with it in that way, that's an interesting route to sort of activate that transparency that you're talking about and to create dialogue.
That's a good one. Actually, to be honest, I have seen in previous companies individuals who have had the courage, once again, of course, we know that's one of those traits that you need to bring, that were, pointing the finger or pressing the finger into a wound and talking about it, finding the right platform at a management meeting or whatever, knowing full well that in the beginning, everybody would look at them, or at least their managers would look at them as a nuisance. It would be, annoying. They didn't want to hear about that. They didn't think things that they were pointing out were, relevant enough. And then they had the courage to not give up. It was courageous also because, because in the worst case, what could happen is that, people think of you, come on, and you don't take you seriously anymore, or in the worst case, want to fire you because, you're not playing ball. But anyway, so they had the courage to not give up. And I've seen cases where that actually led to an executive level discussion. It led to tangible changes in behaviors, company policies, and so on. So it does work, but you have to find that courage, I believe, in you when you're, somewhere in the middle of the organization, to do this despite the adversary that you may be seeing initially.
And stick with it as well, based on what you said there, Frank. You might be brave once, but then you've got to stick with it. So that whole piece around being committed to staying the course. Yes,
you're right. And it is uncomfortable. It may even feel a little bit scary. But at the end of the day, you'll be able to look yourself in the mirror. And I think it's good. That's actually what inspires others to say, like, maybe this guy's right, And that's where it starts. But it does feel uncomfortable.
I named this persistence. And I think it doesn't have to be so hard and complicated. And why do I say this? Because you can always choose to action on a personal level. Like you could have a coffee break and just put there some ideas in a very non-violent way, like not threatening the status quo, just asking, but why don't we try this thing? Or how do you feel about this? I mean, it's about advocating also on a personal level, not only institutional. Because when you are in a management meeting and you have an agenda and you have to stick to it, okay, maybe each person there will be interested in his own agenda and not in higher purposes and volatile things like inclusivity, But when you communicate in person with someone and maybe you find a common goal and maybe this inclusivity could solve also a bit of his problems and yours, then you could find a way. So it's practically being a promoter, not from top down, the other way around, taking it from down to top.
Yes, that definitely has power. It's probably sometimes underestimated, but it does have power. So, last question. I think that we need to wrap it up. Let's probably make it short. Just, either you already know the answer for yourself, or perhaps you have an idea. If the benefits of an inclusive culture are so obvious, why doesn't every company on the planet already, transform into an inclusive culture? Why hasn't that happened yet?
Unconscious bias and groupthink plays into that for me.
So you think
Sorry,
that's
I'm
where
trying to keep my answer really short. So those would be the two things that would play into it for me in terms of why it doesn't happen right now.
Well, you might be right. Maybe there are just enough companies in the world where, at least in some form, on the board and executive leadership, there's no awareness for it. This could be. What do you think, Brett?
I think there's an appetite for it, and I do believe there's a generational lag, and that's shifted in recent years. So the momentum is now in that this is the way forward. So my sense is that people haven't engaged in it because they're fearful of the loss of control, of everybody can actually contribute as a leader. Everybody's point of view is worth listening to. So my sense from a psychological perspective is that people are frightened to lose the power and the control. And now, as we move through a total world of no power or control over what happens, I sense we've become more embedded within that culture. And actually, I see inclusivity becoming part of our everyday language, not just part of one person's role who might work in the HR team and was probably recruited in the last 2 years.
Right. Actually, I agree with that. I think the generational lag there's a big driver for it. Anna, you get the last word.
Okay, no pressure. Answering your question, there is this saying, I like to practice what I preach. So with a topic so sensitive like inclusivity, it's a lot of preaching. And if there is not a lot of background into practicing, it's difficult to put the idea into the practice. So that's the resistance. And there is also the known recipe, as we said in the beginning of our talk. And this means a personal effort from all the stakeholders that are in this process, and also a commitment from top management that they really want to do something in this regard, not because it's a trend, not because it's something that looks nice on paper and on the company values, but because it really helps the business. Because in the end, it's all about this. We can adapt better to our different customers. We can adapt better to the workforce, because now new generations come with different ideals and different expectations from the workplace. And if 10, 20 years ago, being in a big corporation was like, wow, and I will stick there forever. Now we already sense the difference in the perception. Like, people don't identify anymore with their job and with the status. They want more there. They want to have their inner self revealed and be accepted for what they are, and then they will be at their best. But it's a huge gap in the perspective, because let's be honest, I think none of us would have thought 10 years ago that I could really speak for myself up, and I want to be seen in my individuality, and I want to show my personality. I think the mindset was, it's a job. I go there to do my tasks and be paid for it. And I don't necessarily have to show people who I am. And I'm okay with this. It's not a problem that I cannot truly express what I believe, my vision, or that maybe I don't have to cover my tattoos, like, okay, this is me. I go at the interview having piercing and stuff like this. And you already sense this difference. So either we accept it or not. I think we are also helped by the exterior circumstances, because repetition will make us accept easier. And sometimes you cannot put a stop to the change. And personally, I'm hopeful, because no matter the resistance, this will happen step by step.
So these were not only great last words, but I also have a feeling it was a really good closure to our discussion that we just had. Would you agree? Okay, so then thank you everybody for joining us on Real Talk Guest Talk about inclusive leadership and inclusivity. It was a great pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Frank.
Take care, guys.
Thank you all. Great ideas and very nice topic.